Thank you, Scott and Rachel. And maybe my panelists can start coming up so we can get on with the first panel. And while they're doing that, I just want to pick up on Scott's compliments to Rachel's leadership. I woke up in the middle of the night wondering, well, why is it that this symposium is so compelling that we keep coming back every year? And I think it does have to do with leadership. So that got me to thinking, well, okay, so what is it that Rachel does? And I thought about leadership styles. I thought about, people who lead by being way out front. Picture a lead dog in a sled team. I thought about people who lead from behind. Think about the musher on the back of the sled. And I thought about people whose brilliance in leadership is bringing the right group together, get the right dogs on your team, the right combination of them. But there are also leaders that inspire. And these are people who consistently live their values in a way that inspires other people. It doesn't matter whether they're out front, those leaders are in the back or in the middle or off to the side. It's that inspiration. So I went to sleep thinking, well, I think the answer is that Rachel leads in all those ways depending on the circumstance. So we're quite fortunate that she does that. And part of that brilliance is bringing together, I'm getting feedback, is there something I should do differently? I'm sorry? Oh, right. Are there switches on your mics? Can you maybe turn them off?
Hello.
It's off, okay. So our panel today is going to address climate change and environmental innovation. And I think to set that up, I need to talk a little bit about the context, the climate and environmental context. And so I just want to highlight what the study of environmental Arctic change and other Arctic researchers have made very, very clear in recent years. And that is that the changes that are happening in the Arctic environment are amplifying the warming of the entire planet. I'll just give you 3 examples. So for thousands of years, floating on the top of the planet has been a giant mirror that's reflected most of the sun's energy back to space. And that giant mirror, sea ice, has been shrinking dramatically and is less than half today what it was 40 years ago. We must have another mic here somewhere. Is there anything I should do differently?
No, I'm adjusting.
Okay.
Volume so everybody can hear you.
Terrific.
But you just keep on going.
Okay. Thanks. So that shrinking sea ice, which was highly reflective like a mirror, leaves behind unfrozen seawater, which is highly absorptive. So we're replacing this mirror, this highly reflective surface, with a surface that absorbs heat. And hence, as we warm the planet, we melt ice. We warm the ocean more, we melt more ice, right? That's an amplification. Another example would be thawing permafrost. Right? So for thousands of years, huge volumes of carbon have been locked in the permafrost freezer in the form of dead plants and animals. And as that permafrost thaws, some of that carbon is released into the atmosphere in the form of methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide, potent greenhouse gases, another amplification of the warming signal. Rachel mentioned sea level rise and we're likely to see here at Bell Harbor. The sea level is rising because as we've warmed the Arctic ocean, or the ocean, I should say, it expands like any substance that gets heated. But at the same time, that warming is also melting glaciers and ice sheets. And now, the input of water from those melting ice sheets and glaciers is exceeding thermal expansion in contribution to sea level rise. So here's another amplification of a global effect by the change in the Arctic. And I think it's important to emphasize that these changes are unprecedented in the history of our species. This has not been seen since before man came along on the planet. And so we need solutions, and we need to address the impacts in various walks of life, and we need them quickly, and we need innovative solutions. We need to do things in new ways. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have each panelist, as I introduce them, will just give us in a few minutes one or two examples of how their organization innovates in response to the changes we're seeing in the Arctic environment. We'll start with Tashina Duddle from the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. So Tashina, do you want to give us one or two innovative examples of how the consortium is impacting health and infrastructure?
Is my mic working? So my name is Tashina Duddle. I'm a Nup'ak from the North Slope of Alaska, and I work at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. As it's been mentioned, we're in a situation in the Arctic where we're kind of the canary in the coal mine. We're seeing infrastructure in our rural and tribal communities that we work with, where infrastructure is falling into bodies of water due to erosion or melting permafrost. We're seeing buildings falling off their foundations, infrastructure falling, below the level of the tundra with degrading permafrost, and the impacts are vast and catastrophic. In the work that we're doing at ANTHC, we're working with the community of Newtok in their relocation efforts, and that's been really driven by a community conversation we've been facilitating, working with the tribe to allow for a conversation to occur between different agencies and helping to be very inclusive in that conversation and leading up to that plan to move the community. I think this is a really important takeaway in my message, is that we really need to be working with communities on driving the conversation and being the torchbearer in planning and their efforts to adapt or relocate. Some of the technologies and innovative solutions that we're using to either adapt to or relocate communities include, we work largely in water and sewer infrastructure, and so we have a portable alternative sanitation system, which is an in-home standalone water and sewer alternative. So we have the ability to get rid of the honey bucket and have access to safe drinking water within the home. It's a movable system, so we're really moving towards modular and movable systems that we're constructing in communities. We have modular water treatment plants, power stations, laundromats, and so if communities are in a place where they would have to relocate, they can move expensive to install and construct infrastructure if that's a necessary thing down the road. And then we have adaptation strategies. As I'm sure many of you are aware, a lot of the infrastructure in the Arctic have thermosiphons to passively cool the ground and keep permafrost frozen. We're piloting a project this summer in an attempt to actively cool the liquid the moving liquid in that thermosiphon, basically bolting on a chiller to a thermosiphon to actively cool the permafrost and keep the ground stable. This hasn't been attempted before, but we're excited about the potential of that technology to help communities adapt, at least in the short term, because we're seeing, million-dollar facilities. Quinnahock is a great example of a community that has a water treatment plant and a utility building and a washateria and clinic that are all experiencing extreme failure of their foundations. And so this is a project that we would like to test and try as a stopgap measure between now and maybe future plans to move or build new buildings. I've read some studies, some projections of failures in the billions of dollars due to permafrost degradation alone in Alaska. And so these are some innovative solutions, but I think we need more options. We need more innovations. We need policy changes, and to break down barriers between agencies so that we can do more and more quickly, because we're really running out of time. These things are happening very quickly, and if there aren't measures taken to adopt now, the future is a little scary.
I grew up in Wisconsin, and so you're probably wondering, why is there an undergraduate student from the University of Washington who's actually from the state of Wisconsin on this panel? And that's because during my freshman year in college, I started the American Conservation Coalition, which is an organization that focuses on bringing both sides together on environmental solutions with a focus on bringing more conservative voices into the discussion. So I come to this conversation from a youth perspective, but also from a political strategy perspective on how we can get things done in this country and globally on important issues like the Arctic. And so I'm looking forward to the question and answer part of this, but I wanted to touch on two things that we're doing that might seem like out-of-the-box innovations, but innovations to push the climate and environmental conversation forward. The first is getting more conservative-leaning people involved, because here in the United States, we haven't been able to do a lot on climate change and the environment because it's been such a partisan issue for so long. And so many conservatives care about the environment, but they don't really know how to approach it. And so one of the things that we're working on is getting younger conservative voices to have a larger presence in these important discussions, and being realistic about environmental issues and making it tangible for people in important communities that haven't been reached on these issues, that are seeing the effects of Arctic change or climate change in their backyard. And also talking to people in a state that they can understand, which is that we do have time to fix this. All is not lost. We have the capability as a population, as a species, to return and get back towards the right direction. And having that positive, upbeat message to people who might be skeptical of these conversations from the get-go. And also just encouraging more bipartisanship and bringing more voices into the discussion. And what that also means is more corporate involvement. And so it's really good to see at this event so many companies like Alaska Airlines and oil companies here showcasing how they can take a step forward as companies and make a massive difference in these problems and mitigating them. One quick story that I always like to tell is I had the opportunity to tour an oil field with one of my good friends in Texas, and I went in with a lot of stereotypes, but I was able to see firsthand the good work that many oil companies are trying to do on reducing the emissions and showcasing how using clean energy through oil companies is something that is possible, and how we can all work together on this, even as crazy as it might seem with an oil company. And so I think what I'd like people to take away is that this is something where we need to have bipartisanship to get this done. We need to work with companies to get this done. 150 companies have pledged to go 100% renewable in the United States by 2030. And this is all steps in the right direction. And so I'm hopeful that we can tackle some of these issues during the question and answer. Really excited to be here and excited to be pushing for bipartisan reforms on this issue.
Thank you very much, Benji.
So the answer why for us in the Geophysical Institute is that Alaska is an incredible natural laboratory. We have a lot of natural phenomena that we can reach out and study that there's nowhere else in the United States that have that. For example, the aurora. Until 2 weeks ago, when we ran out of darkness, we had lots of interesting auroral displays. In August, again, we'll get some darkness back. We're going to begin to see it again. 54 active volcanoes. Eruptions every few months. Volcanoes are important for putting ash and interfering with the weather. The state is 90% permafrost. We had last year, our guys counted 52,000 earthquakes in Alaska, 270 miles of sea ice around Alaska, 100,000 glaciers, and some very interesting Arctic weather. That's Alaska. It's an incredible laboratory, and those are the things that we study. We have a number of operational facilities. We launch sounding rockets. We downlink satellite data for NASA. We downlink 40% of NASA's polar orbiting satellite data. We have a volcano observatory, an earthquake center, a supercomputer, and we do all these things. So to mention a couple innovations, NASA is about to launch in about a year or so the NISAR, NASA Indian Synthetic Aperture Radar Satellite. Dr. LaBelle Hammer, sitting in the audience, is going to raise a hand. She runs at the Alaska Satellite Facility. She's going to be downlinking, there's going to be more than 100 petabytes of data, very high resolution data coming in from that satellite. A number of universities are launching CubeSats, small satellites, 4-inch cubes. We're a space grant university, we do that also, but more importantly, the Alaska Satellite Facility that Dr. LaBelle Hammer manages downlinks that kind of data too. We fly unmanned aircraft. We just recently started flying Sentries. They can fly 110 miles an hour, 100-pound payload for up to 8 hours. We got 10 of those. We'll be flying those, and Dr. LaBelle Hammer is working with Sandia to build a high Arctic research center up at Licktock Point, a place you can drive to from here. In a lot of Alaska, that's a big deal. But imagine runways and hangars and dorms and laboratories to fly unmanned aircraft across the Arctic and across Alaska. And two more quick things. We're about to field a airborne hyperspectral facility to study climate change. And I mentioned climate change, and I mentioned all the natural phenomena. What's important is that it's all linked. We know that the Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. We know that there's twice as much carbon in permafrost as in the atmosphere now. And as the permafrost melts, it releases carbon, but the Arctic is also becoming more green. The plants are taking up that carbon. So all these different disciplines are very important to measure them all together. And a final point is that we have a hard time with data in Alaska. You know, we fly satellites, we fly unmanned aircraft, but there's not a lot of roads, there's not a lot of places we can get access to. It's hard to get ground-based data. That's why the weather forecasts are not so good in Alaska. So one of the things that one of our scientists is working with is something. It sounds like cereal. It's called CocoRa. It's a community-coordinated rain, hail, and snow center, and he's working. It's sort of a student science. It's working with students, working with the community to get data, to get it into the weather models, to do a better job of modeling the weather. And I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Bob. So now we want to turn to Steve Cohn. Steve's had a long record of working in land management in Alaska and now heads up the Nature Conservancy's efforts in the state. Steve, how about innovations from the Nature Conservancy?
Okay, thank you. Good morning. And thank you for inviting myself and the Nature Conservancy to participate. This is my, I believe, third participation in the Arctic Encounter Symposium, and I'm thrilled to be here. Just a little background on the Nature Conservancy. We're an international nonprofit organization. We work in all 50 states, 72 countries around the world, and we are a science-based organization, and our vision is to envision a world where nature and people thrive, and people act to conserve nature for its own sake and its ability to fulfill and enrich our lives. In October of last year, several senior scientists from the Nature Conservancy and other organizations published a paper in the Journal of the Ecological Society of America entitled An Obtainable Global Vision for Conservation and Human Well-Being. And in this analysis, we looked at two scenarios through 2050. One is an extension of what we call business as usual, so continuing with existing trends and population projections. And the second is a sustainability model, looking at an alternative pathway to see if we can achieve ambitious conservation and climate goals given current expectations of human population and economic growth. So it's a global analysis modeled through 2050. We looked at an increase in population globally of 41%, so 9.7 billion people on the planet by 2050, and estimated GDP growth of 317% to $292 trillion. The short answer is yes. By adjusting how and where we produce food and energy, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions consistent with the Paris Climate Agreement. We can stop overfishing globally. We can protect 17% of the area of each ecoregion in each country and produce additional benefits for water demand and air quality. So we do feel that it is possible to achieve an obtainable vision for both conservation and human well-being in the future. How, under the sustainability model, how we would propose to do that is a major shift in the way that we produce energy and food. Currently, in 2010, our fossil fuel mix of energy is 84% globally. By 2050, in order to achieve that sustainable outcome, we'd be looking more at a fossil fuel mix of 13%, renewables 54%, and nuclear energy 33%. This would require a shift in renewable generation to already converted lands. We would look to manage 100% of the globe's fisheries on a multiple sustained yield basis. And we also looked at a series of analyses related to agriculture. I won't get into those here. So what are the implications for Alaska? Just talk about two things, fisheries and energy. Alaska is held up as an example of a state that has done a very good job managing our fisheries on a sustained yield basis. One of the consequences of our fishery system, however, we have seen impacts to local communities and coastal communities, loss of access to fishing, and that's something that we would have to look at addressing globally if we move towards maximum sustained yield fishery globally. Energy is a very significant issue for Alaska. All Alaskans benefit from oil and gas development in our state. If we envision a future by 2050 where we have a reduced dependence on fossil fuels globally, that will have impacts for Alaska, and we have to start talking about that now and start thinking about how we will manage that transition in our state and what future we want for our state, and how do we do it in such a way that we do not diminish our economic base and transition towards an equitable and beneficial future with maximum human well-being. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So the Inupiat have used innovation to thrive in the Arctic for thousands of years and to make a living there. Delbert Rexford is the president of the Utqiagvik Inupiat Corporation, and he's going to share one or two examples of how UIC's innovations help them face climate and environmental change today. Delbert?
Hello. Good morning. Pakalagipsi, I greet you. I would respectfully ask all my Alaskans to stand up. Please stand up. We're going to honor the whaling captains that are out on the ice through the treacherous ice conditions that they're facing right now. We've lost lives over the years, claimed lives, and yet this year, 5 incidents have happened at Notak, in the Kuskokwim, and other areas where lives have been taken because of the accelerated, rapid, fast climate change. This is real time. Just take 5 seconds to honor them and the whaling captains that are out there. Please be seated. Thank you very much. UIC is the village corporation that represents 2,900 plus shareholders. And we're faced with, we're at ground zero, just like so many other Arctic communities across Alaska, the 12 regions, the diversity of the geographic regions, the coastal erosions, the river erosions of fish camps falling into rivers, the accumulation of persistent organic pollutants into our region because of airborne transport or waterborne, depending on the type of persistent organic pollutants that are emitted by the industrial nations of the world. And this is not what we caused. This is what we are living with at real time. We continue to seek innovative ways to adapt, just like when the first Arctic explorers came up and we embraced them. We embrace their knowledge and their curiosity about who we are as a people, as a society that have survived the Arctic for centuries, for thousands of years. It is sometimes difficult to go into your ice cellar and you see the threat of the permafrost threatening your very food cache that you provide food security to your community as a whaling captain. Figuratively speaking, a whale is 1 ton per foot. And it is very spiritual in our society to catch a whale and to be honored to feed the community. Not only at the first catch, but also at the blanket toss feast and special events, especially when our guests from other parts of Alaska and other parts of the world come into our community. This is how we honor them and respect them. Our ice caches are a threat. Our ice planting platform is at threat. For the first time in my lifetime, the Barrow Whaling Captains Association recommended whaling north of Point Barrow. Traditionally and customarily, we had a 38-mile hunting platform. So basically, 30 miles of it is treacherous, dangerous, and a threat to human life. So we have to go to Point Barrow or east now to harvest bowhead whales. This is real time. This is happening right now as they are out on the ice. And the innovative ways that we look for is working with science, embracing science. Architects, engineers, global scientists from UAF, from University of Texas, El Paso, conducting coastal impact assessment studies, studying what is being emitted into our region through airborne transport. Our Barrow Environmental Observatory was dedicated to the late Charles E. Took Edwardson Jr., who was an activist for land claims. In essence, at ground zero, each day we are adapting to those changes that are occurring. Whether it's on the rivers in the Northwest region, whether it's in the Bering Straits where there's no economy on St. Lawrence Island, or working with ANTHC on relocating Newtok to McCleavick, a 5-year project that we're very honored to have been awarded. And then now the amount to relocate them because of real-time erosion, that communities have to be relocated. This is real time. It's happening right now. Shismarat and other communities. Over the years, we've spent millions of dollars of fighting erosion. And now we are looking at rock armor to protect our coastline, that to protect hundreds of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure. Again, this is bringing in new technology, new means, long-term protection of the infrastructures and human life that may be at stake. So since time immemorial, we've embraced innovation. We've embraced adaptation. We had to. It was cold. We had to learn how to be warm. We had to learn how to be innovative, creative, to make a waterproof skin boat to harvest the marine mammals that sustain our culture, our identity. We had to be innovative to take the caribou sinew to sew that same skin. And we had to learn by experience that only a baby scale oil is appropriate for lubricating the sinew, to bring all that together so that we can go out on the ocean, catch the whale, and feed the community and the people. I'd like to end it on that note, but I'd like to just say that it's an honor and a privilege, and I'm really humbled to be here, that so many dignitaries from across the Arctic that sincerely care about the impacts in the Arctic. In closing, I just want to say that we are still challenged. You've got the polar sea code, you've got the marine code that we need to, international law that we need to adhere to in the Bering Straits, in the Arctic, in the Canadian Arctic. And we embrace engineering, architecture, learning new things to make life better for those that we serve. I was born in Kotzebue. For those of you that are from Northwest, please stand up. Please. I was born in Kotzebue in the little house that that my father built. Eva Snyder was midwife. So I'm glad to say I'm a territorial baby. And I'll end it on that note.
Thank you very much, Delbert. That was terrific. We have a number of questions that have come in from the audience already, and I want to start with one that was directed towards Benji. The questioner applauds you for working on climate in a bipartisan manner and asks what you see as the first effective bipartisan legislative goal in the United States.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. Is this working? Okay. So when I look at the issue of climate change as a young person and also as somebody who identifies as conservative, I'm very frustrated by the fact that conservatives haven't been a part of that discussion for a long time, and that people who are left of center often are put a wall up to working with conservatives. So I think the first goal in general is to start having a dialogue about these issues that is bipartisan. But if you look at a legislative goal, it's going to have to be, I think the United States has an opportunity to lead the globe and showcase what we can do in this country to reduce emissions and pass a comprehensive policy. And what it will take is to have an environmental focus, but also an economic focus, and the ability to look at allowing our country to move forward economically and with a diverse group of energy producers, but also have some very attainable and smart targets to reduce emissions. But we're not, in my opinion, there yet in terms of the dialogue. And both sides have to do a far better job of working across the aisle on these issues and being willing to have a beneficial discussion. And I think we have to also get to the point where we realize both sides want to help the environment. Both sides want the environment to be cleaner for the next generation and better for the next generation, and to protect places like the Arctic. So let's start there. Let's start on the fact that we have the same goals and start talking about policies after we've come to that point. And I think that that's where we need to go in terms of the country and in the dialogue, and a policy will then follow, and those are really important discussions to have. But I do think we need to get something passed to show the rest of the world and to the rest of the country that we can get something done on these issues. And obviously, time is of the essence, and so we need to get something done fairly soon. But I do think we're trending in the right direction.
Terrific. I think the next question follows on nicely on that, and the question to the whole group is, how can corporations, governments, and indigenous peoples promote innovation in the Arctic? Who wants to start on that one? Would you like to start on that one?
I'd like to start. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Well, you know, as an individual, I've worked with our corporation. I've served on the government, and as an indigenous person, I've been a tribal government council member. And I think in the spirit of cooperation, our Inupiat values, of sharing knowledge and having a sincere leadership role in making life better, and through collaboration and partnership. Because there's federal dollars, there's state dollars, and then there's local dollars for those that municipalities that have taxing authority, which is under threat right now in Alaska. And it's important that all too often we get fragmented. I serve the IRA, I serve the city, I serve the borough. But at the end of the day, we all go home to our community, in our homes, and we're still one people. And that's where we need to develop that leadership that says, yes, I am the borough, you're the IRA, and you're the corporation. But collectively, that strength, that authority, collective authority, can make life so much better in our communities across the state of Alaska.
Tashina?
Can you hear me? I think this is a great question. This is a realm that I work in, and sometimes it's hard to break down barriers between agencies and communities and have a conversation, but I've found that it's really valuable to rally behind a cause and a need, a project, and have that really driven by the voice of the people in the community that we're working with. Like you said, leaning on our traditional values and sharing knowledge between the indigenous people that we serve, and making space to allow for planning and funding to happen between agencies and breaking down barriers between different groups is really, really valuable. And you're bringing more heads and more perspectives into the conversation, and I think that's the most productive environment to see progress, is to break down those barriers and have those conversations and be very inclusive.
Thanks, Tashina. I would have to say that if I were in the audience, I would have asked that question too. I think it's really important. And in fact, I need to say that the study of environmental Arctic change research, a group that I have the honor to direct now, is going to convene a conference around exactly this issue in Washington on the 4th to 6th of September. What we're trying to do is recognize that the issues before us, the challenges before us, are not going to be solved by scientists. They're not going to be solved by indigenous people. They're not going to be solved by policymakers alone. But together, we can make progress. And I really appreciate, Delbert, your remarks about embracing science and using science to help in your long tradition of innovating. I think science has a big role to play, but we really are not sufficiently effective at making what we know, whether it's from indigenous knowledge or scientific knowledge, available to policymakers. We have to change that, and that's what the Arctic Futures 2050 conference is aimed at doing in the fall. Enough for the paid advertisement. Benji,
one quick
thing. Time, so
one really quick thing to add. I think all too often when it comes to these environmental decisions, the local communities and the places that are affected by the environmental decisions from the federal government or the state government, they don't take into account the local communities. And so you have somebody who's making a decision in Washington, D.C. that doesn't know the issues of local communities in Alaska, that doesn't know the indigenous people's problems that are going on with the environment. And so it's a matter of creating partnerships and working with those local communities to make the best decision and make something that's beneficial for both sides. And I think a lot of times that's lost, and so it's a matter of leaders trying to take a new approach on that.
1 minute.
I think Steve wanted to go. Did you have something? And then Bob.
Oh, sure.
Quickly.
I'll just add. I had an opportunity a few weeks ago to see a presentation from a young leader from a community in the Bristol Bay region who is innovating with a new run-of-the-river hydro electric generation facility for her community. And it was a really powerful example, I think, of how the innovation and leadership that's emerging in rural Alaska can really help, I think, show a way forward for so many of us. She was able to leverage some support from government, from corporations. Her community is very supportive, not only because of sort of the bigger picture of how renewables like run-of-the-river hydro can help with our carbon challenges, but just the fundamentals of the cost of energy in rural Alaska, the dependence on diesel, and how difficult that is for communities to afford to provide that power in their communities. So I think there's a lot of innovation that's happening all around Alaska, and trying to think of ways to support that, to bring together government, industry, and these young leaders who are really innovating, I think could be a really good recipe for success.
Bob, less than a minute, please.
One sentence. Focus more on the young people. They don't have these prejudices, and they embrace innovation readily. So building on what you just said, focus more on the young people. That's the solution.
Terrific. I'm going to circle back to the very first question that came up on the prompter, and it was directed towards me. Others may have something to say about this. Just real quickly, the question was about the use of geoengineering to draw down carbon and or otherwise solve this problem. I'll just real quickly say there's a recent National Academy of Sciences study on geoengineering. I would recommend that. I'm aware of a proposal, a study that suggests we need to go out and put reflective beads on sea ice to keep it from losing its reflectivity. But the most thorough analysis that I've seen recently of this suggests that to meet the goal of keeping climate such that we can survive in it, we need both to reduce our emissions and probably to draw down carbon. I think we're out of time. I thank the panelists very much, and I thank the audience for the great questions. Thank you.